Good morning. Today is the first day of Sivan, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and the 7th of June. We're going to be looking at the sixth reading, Parsha Bamidbar. And the sixth reading is dedicated to what we call the redeeming of the firstborn. Now, we met the firstborn actually the first time when we talked about Esau and Jacob. And there we learned that Esau had sold his firstborn rights to Jacob. What are these firstborn rights? In every family in the ancient world, the firstborn was responsible for the family sacrifices and anything else that had to do with sacred ritual. When the Israelites came out of Egypt, we heard about a redemption in a different sense. Now, we read about this in Exodus 13. We're going to read it in a moment again to look at it and to pay close attention to it. But because we're so affected by the end of the story of the firstborns, which is actually happening here in our Parsha, in our Torah reading, in today's Torah reading, because of this, we actually reflect and project what we have here back on what happened after the Israelites came out of Egypt. And so, as you'll see, most people think, me included, that from the time that the people came out of Egypt, it was required, it was necessary for the firstborn to be redeemed in the sense of being replaced by a priest. But that is not exactly the whole story. First of all, because here in our reading, as we'll see in a moment, the firstborn are not being replaced by priests. They're being replaced by Levites, which is a topic in and of itself. One might say because there weren't enough priests at the time. But this in and of itself requires some observation, because why exactly? I mean, it should be that the way we do it today is that one priest can redeem or replace many, many firstborn. So even though there's only 4 priests at the moment, Aaron, Elazar, Itamar, and Pinchas, Elazar's son. So even though there's only 4 of them, maybe only 3, maybe even Pinchas is not yet considered a priest. So there may be a couple more children that were born in the meantime. But let's say there's only 3 that are adults. So they could redeem and replace all the firstborn. But the Torah here takes a different stance. And let's read it. First of all, in our reading, and then we'll go back to try to re-understand what happened when they came out of Egypt. So here it says like this. God said to Moses, "Tally all the firstborn Israelite males 1 month old and over, and take a census of their names. And you must take the Levites for me, I am God, in place of all the Israelite firstborn, and the Levites' lambs in place of all the firstborn of the Israelites." So there were 2 things here that they did. One was by numbers, which was however many firstborn there were among the Israelites that are not Levites, and also the firstborn of their animals. Both needed to be redeemed or replaced by the Levites. So, the firstborn males were replaced by Levites. The firstborn animals were replaced by animals of the Levites, not firstborn, regular animals. However, the firstborn males, the humans, had to be counted and taken a census of. We had to know how many there were. And when it came to the animals, there's no census taken. It's just assumed that however many there are among the Israelites, the Levites animals will take their place. Then the Torah continues. So Moses counted all the Israelite firstborn as God had commanded him. The tally of the firstborn males 1 month old and over, according to the number of names, was 22,273. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the Levites in place of all the Israelite firstborn, and the Levites in place of the Levites will be mine, I am God." So there's 22,000 Levites. We know this from the census that we saw a couple of days ago. And there's 22,273 firstborn males among the Israelites. So what do we have? We have that there are 273 in excess. So says God, as for those to be redeemed, the 273 Israelite firstborn who are in excess of the Levites, what do you do with them? So you must take 5 shekels per head. Take them according to the sacred shekel, by which the shekel is 20 grams, 20 gerah, as we spoke about this. And you must give the money to Aaron and his sons as redemption for the firstborn who are in excess of them. So here we see that it's a special case. The question we asked before is, why not give the money? Why not do this in lieu of the priests? So we see here that the Torah does do that. It says, the 22,000, they will be redeemed by, this is a special case. It's only happened once in history. The 22,000 firstborn that have 22,000 Levites instead of them, they will be replaced by them. It's not that they were replaced in the sense that they went to work. The Levites, anyway, were already entrusted with working in the temple. It's rather just to redeem them. But again, the question is really, what do you do now with the 273 excess? There we go back to what we know about redeeming the firstborn, that you need to give the priest 5 shekels, 5, which turns out to be something like 100 grams of silver, or between 80 and 100 grams of silver, and you've redeemed your firstborn son. So that's what the Torah tells us about here in our reading. Now, we said this seems to have already been said in Exodus, when they came out of Egypt. So in Exodus it mentions this twice. It's once in Parshat Ki Tisa and once in Parshat Bo. In Ki Tisa it says exactly what we just said now, that you redeem your firstborn with 5 shekels of silver, 80 to 100 grams of silver, you give it to the priest and you're done. But listen to what the Torah had to say in Exodus 13. It sounds similar, but it's actually different. So I'm going to read Exodus 13, 13. Chapter 13, verse 13. But every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck. And you must redeem every male firstborn among your children. And when in time to come a child of yours asks you, saying, "What does this mean? What are you doing?" You shall reply, meaning, "Why are you redeeming your firstborn child?" The answer is, it was with a mighty hand that God brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, Havaya slew every male firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of both human and beast. Therefore, I sacrificed to Havaya, to God, every first male issue of the womb. But redeem, meaning here he's talking about from the animals, but redeem every male firstborn among my children. So again, it doesn't say here that how to do the redemption. In fact, if you compare this to the animals, the same thing that we have here, there's both animals need redemption, the firstborn of the animals, and the firstborn of the humans. The firstborn of the animal in this case, in Exodus 13, it doesn't say you redeem him for an animal from the Levites or from the priests. It doesn't even mean that you exchange him for anything. In fact, if you don't redeem him, what is his service? He doesn't go to the priests. He doesn't become their property. He doesn't become the property of the Levites. He doesn't become sacred in the sense that he becomes a property of the temple. Rather, you have to kill him. You can't enjoy this donkey that just gave birth to a firstborn. But amazingly, he says almost the same thing about the male. He doesn't say exactly this, you have to kill him, because obviously that wouldn't be right. But he says something else. He says, when your sons come to ask you, why do you redeem the firstborn of the males and of the animals? You answer, because when we were in Egypt, God killed all the firstborn, and he spared our firstborn, both animal and man. And so really, there's something about the firstborn that is already like dedicated to God in some way. It belongs to him. To redeem is really, in this strange sense, and you have to wrap your head around this. This is not easy to understand in the beginning. To redeem here in Exodus doesn't mean to replace him with a priest. It doesn't mean to give his duties to a priest. It means to save him from the angel of death that killed all the firstborn. That's what it's talking about. Again, this is hard at first to grasp, but there's a lot of reason for this, and there's a famous tshuva from Rav Chai Gaon, from the Gaonite period, who seems to say the same thing here. Saying that the first time it was actually talking about redeeming the firstborn from death, not from serving in the temple. That only came much later. Now, if you remember, a couple of days ago, we were speaking about a principle that appears in the Torah, that the first time something is taught, first some event occurs, some motif occurs, it's still not rectified. It's in fact what we call a shell or a husk. And only the second time is it really rectified. So we brought the example of the world was created, and then at the end of the first parsha, God wants to destroy the world, and he's upset that he's in distress about having created it. And only after Noach does the world settle in to a more stable existence. The same thing can be said here. In the beginning, the redemption of the firstborn was to redeem the firstborn from death, from belonging, as it were, to an angel of death in some way. Only later, in Parsha Kitisa, and especially here in our Parsha, does the redemption of the firstborn become something else entirely, which is, I'm not redeeming him from death anymore. That we're finished with. Now, we're redeeming him for his services, and we're giving the priest money, as it were, that the priest should take these services, and the firstborn is freed from them. So it's more like freeing him rather than just redeeming him. We need to take this one more step further in order to understand this. Why is it that a father who just had a son would have this thought that the son is somehow under the possession of the angel of death? I mean, the story is obviously clear because that's what happened in Egypt. But why would someone afterwards think like this? This is a good example of the Torah coming to rectify our base human behavior. In other words, there is a mutual fear between the father and the firstborn son. The father is afraid of the firstborn son, even though he won't say it. Why? Because on the one hand, the firstborn son is his continuity. On the other hand, he's coming to replace him. It's very hard not to think that. There is, if you come to terms with it, if you really think about it, then you understand that the reason you had a son, the reason you had children, is so that they would replace you. The firstborn son has a fear from his father, because at some point he realizes, wait a minute, if I'm coming to replace him, he can't be too happy about that. These are base human fears. In a sublimed, more advanced civilization, we may not fear these fears, and we may not feel these primal fears, but they're still there lurking in the shadows. And so the father may not want to get rid of the firstborn, and the firstborn may not be so afraid of the father. We've talked in the past about the idea that circumcision is like the sublimation, it's the rectification of the need of the father to, as it were, to get rid of his child. The circumcision is almost like showing the child, look, I had a chance, I could have gotten rid of you, but I didn't. And it's almost like a scar that you leave. Again, these are very basic primal instincts that humans have, and the Torah is trying to rectify them. So there's a lot of reasons for the circumcision. It's first of all the covenant and so on between us and God. You've entered the covenant of Abraham. But it also serves a psychological function. And the psychological function is the child, the male, knows that the father has already done his worst, as it were. It's not going to get any worse than this. The opposite side is that in the beginning, the father feels that he does indeed need to get rid of his firstborn because he's going to replace him. So the Torah comes and says, in the beginning, yes, there's this feeling that maybe the firstborn belongs to death. Maybe that's where he should be. The Torah then sublimates this and says, don't look at it that way. He doesn't belong to death. He's not replacing you in the sense that you thought. He's your continuity. Instead of dedicating him, almost like dedicating your continuity to the temple, like trying to protect yourself this way, says the Torah to the father, take your firstborn, free him from his service, which you wanted to throw him into as a sort of sacrifice in order to ensure your life, and instead free him from this service, free yourself from this fear that you have of being replaced, from this fear that you have which causes you to maybe want to sacrifice your child in some way. If this seems so impossible to understand in human society, I think this is one of the things that is driving the fundamentalist Islamist point of view about children. They're offering them as sacrifices in a certain sense. They want them to be sacrifices. They talk about this. This is like a primal need of the human being to redeem himself, as if I'm offering something to you, God, so let me have life. Says the Torah, don't get into that. Even though that was what the Torah said at the beginning, after the Exodus, or just before the Exodus, that it took care of that psychological need, now it's only about redeeming the firstborn so that they can have a free life. And you're paying, as it were, telling the father, you're paying, as it were, for their freedom. You don't have to sacrifice them. You don't have to dedicate their lives to holiness, to the temple. You can let them have a normal life. And so that's what we see in our Parsha, this whole idea of redeeming the firstborn for the Levites. And the ones that don't have a Levite to redeem them against, giving 5 shekels of silver to the priest and freeing the firstborn from this need to be, as it were, sacrificed and dedicated to God, or as it was in the beginning when the Israelites came out, sort of redeeming them from the angel of death and all this, and sublimating it to making them into free people, that they can pursue their own lives and they don't have to be dedicated, sacrificed, so on, to some other cause. And this is a very important aspect of the Torah's psychology. It needs to be developed some more. We need to think about it some more. But this is definitely a real direction that we need to spend some time thinking about. Thank you very much for joining today. Wish you Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos to everyone, and a healthy month and a good month. And we should see many miracles this month and have a very joyous and light-filled Shavuot, Feast of Weeks, in a few days. All the best.